30 years ago, I sat behind a radio console in a college studio. During one of my weekly talk show broadcasts, I interviewed the director of the broadcast meteorology program. It was a novel degree concentration, having only been created a few years before. The idea was simple: create a pathway for those interested in weather and communication that would provide the knowledge and experience needed to get a job at a local television or radio station. In effect, it was helping to train a new breed of science communicators. These wouldn't be just a pretty face that was plucked out of the newsroom to deliver the weather in the evenings. Instead, your local meteorologist would now have a college degree and training on how to communicate their science to the broader public. The 1990s were a golden age for weather television. The Weather Channel played smooth jazz during their Local on the 8 segments, and meteorologists like Jim Cantore, Vivian Brown, and others became household names for viewers. This was the era before reality television, when facts and the science were presented in less of a high-octane dramatic fashion. But this was also the decade that climate change shifted from something a few people were aware of to a more global and politicized issue. Indeed, during that broadcast in 1994, in that small college town in the rural South, the phrase climate change was nothing more than a chapter in a textbook. Today, it's become something more. Welcome to the podcast. I'm Dr. Mack, and I've spent my career with one foot in the clouds, literally with advanced degrees in meteorology and science education, and one foot grounded in communicating that science to the broader public. In this podcast, we aren't going to focus just on the weather. Instead, we're going to look at the truth that often gets lost along the way. Welcome to the Climate Translation. We're living in a world of data. Each of us is bombarded with headlines, commentary, podcasts, and AI-generated content. We curate this content in our own ways. We hear climate scientists talk about terms such as parts per million, degrees C, global mean temperatures, and gigatons of ice melt. But for the vast majority of us, the information does not connect. We don't experience life through data points. We experience life through stories. If you've ever felt that pit in your stomach while scrolling through the headlines, that feeling of being overwhelmed by a problem that feels too big to see, this show's for you. Or perhaps more importantly, if you've ever sat across a dinner table from a friend or family member and tried to explain the why behind our changing world and felt yourself failing because the words just wouldn't come, this show is for you. My goal here is simple. We're going to strip away the jargon and look at the atmosphere through a different lens. We aren't just going to look at the science. We're going to look at the delivery of that science. We'll have episodes where we deconstruct the headlines. We'll take the alarmist clickbait of the week and translate it back into reality. We will create a dinner table toolkit, walking you through how to have a conversation with a skeptic without losing your temper or your friendship. We'll explore the history of weather by examining how we used to talk about the sky and where that connection broke down. We'll look at real-world connections and see how climate change is no longer an abstract concept for millions of people around the world. And I'll present an educator's notebook. I'll share stories from the front lines of the classroom, including the questions my students ask that actually keep me up at night, and the answers that finally made the light bulb go off. I want to stop the shouting across the gap between the experts and the rest of us. Instead, I want to build a bridge. Because when you can translate the science into a story, it stops being a headline to fear and starts being a world we can actually understand and maybe, eventually, fix. In my decades of teaching undergraduate earth science and meteorology courses, I've noticed a pattern that never fails. Every term, a student walks in, arms crossed, looking a bit defensive. They're skeptical. And I always start by telling them being skeptical is great. As a scientist, you should have a skeptical eye. You should want data to inform your decisions. But for many, it's not the data informing their skepticism. It's the echo chamber. Maybe it's the news they choose, the commentators they watch, or the silos we've built around our social lives. It's become difficult to hear an opposing point of view without getting upset. But here, we're not going to debate where the data already tells a clear story. The most common gotcha I get is almost accusatory. Dr. Mack, the climate is always changing. Humans can't possibly affect the whole world. Why are we even discussing this? To that student, I say, you know what? You're 100% correct. The climate is always changing. There is hard evidence in the geological record of massive shifts caused by plate tectonics, volcanism, and changes in orbit, which we call Milankovitch cycles. Many scientists believe that at one point in the geologic past, we had a snowball Earth where the entire planet was almost covered completely in ice. We've had tropical areas where glaciers melted almost entirely and sea levels were hundreds of feet higher than they are today. Climate change is a part of Earth's history. To understand how we know the climate is changing, we have to look at the natural tape recorder of Earth's history. Scientists gather data from a variety of physical archives, including tree rings that show past growth patterns, pollen remains, and sediment samples from the ocean floor. One of the most vital sources is the study of ice cores drilled from places like Greenland and Antarctica. These cores contain tiny bubbles of air trapped hundreds of thousands of years ago, allowing us to directly sample the atmosphere going back as far as 800,000 years. By measuring the carbon dioxide trapped in these bubbles, we can see a direct link between rising CO2 levels and increasing global temperatures over the long term. But we have to focus on the rate of that change. In the geologic record, a quick change usually happens over thousands, hundreds of thousands, even millions of years. What we're seeing now is a jump so rapid, it's almost impossible to believe. We are seeing shifts that normally take millions of years occurring in just 200. Before the Industrial Revolution, CO2 levels sat at approximately 280 parts per million. As of January 2026, those levels have surged to 427 parts per million. The compressed timescale is why 98% of climate scientists are alarmed. I think the problem is we're looking at macro-scale environments through a micro-scale brain. On a small scale, humans can see their impact. If you cut down trees in your backyard, you'll see wildlife change. If you put poison on an anthill, you see the ants die. But once you scale it up to the size of a continent or planet, it becomes harder to conceptualize. We're clearing forest, burning coal, oil, and natural gas, and putting millions of cars on the road. Every single one of those tailpipes is pumping out carbon dioxide. Imagine the world was brought down to a bubble, maybe the size of a city. If you pumped all that exhaust into that one closed bubble, everyone inside would eventually die from the poison. The Earth is nothing more than a large bubble of gas, and we're rapidly changing its chemistry. But let's stop for a moment. When we talk about carbon dioxide, one of the most potent warming gases of our atmosphere, scientists talk about parts per million, or ppm. I just mentioned it. But for most people, that's verbiage. Let's break it down so it actually means something to you. Imagine you have a bathtub and it's full of clear water. 1 part per million is one single drop of red food dye. In the late 1700s, you could put 280 drops in that tub, to represent the atmosphere. Today, you'd have to add 427. Even though 427 drops in a whole tub sounds small, that's a 50% increase from several centuries ago. It's enough to change the color of the water, and for the atmosphere, that amount of gas is enough to change its ability to trap heat. Put another way, imagine a stadium with 1 million people in blue shirts. 1 part per million is 1 person in a red shirt. At the time of the formation of the United States, we would have had 280 red shirts scattered around in the stands. Now, there would be 427. Again, about a 50% increase. It may not sound like much, but it would make them more visible. You could also think of it in terms of medicine. If you have a headache, you might reach for an aspirin. 1 pill may not look like anything compared to your body mass, but it has a dramatic effect on your pain levels because it changes your internal chemistry. Increasing the dosage to 2 pills would make it even more dramatic. Carbon dioxide is also a potent drug for the atmosphere of the planet. We've increased the baseline by 50%, and we're seeing the effects. But, Dr. Mack, my students say, how come you keep harping on this? It's snowing outside right now. It's winter. This is a related question I get all the time. It's a confusion of the difference between weather and climate. It's a distinction that even some of our most high-profile leaders struggle with. I've seen politicians stand on the floor of the U.S. House, throw a snowball, and use that single cold day to dismiss decades of global data as hoopla. But throwing a snowball in winter to disprove climate change is like seeing your stock portfolio go down one afternoon and you decide you're bankrupt. Weather happens day to day. It's the individual snowstorm or the heat wave. Climate, however, is the long-term average. It's the big picture that tells us what to expect over years and decades. We're still going to have winter, spring, summer, and fall. We're still going to have cold days and heavy snow. The issue isn't that the weather is disappearing, it's that the norm is shifting in a way that many scientists call climate weirding. As an educator and a meteorologist, what concerns me most is the drastic change from the established norm and the increasing rate of that change we discussed earlier. Going back to our analogy, what would you think if a stock that historically saw small changes over time suddenly jumped day by day and over the course of 6 months increased its value by 50%? That stock would have the attention of every investor trying to determine what was causing the change. We humans are looking at the global climate system that has lost its balance. While a snowball makes good sound bites, it doesn't change the fact that the underlying physics of our atmosphere is moving into dangerous, uncharted territory. Now, it's one thing for me to stand in front of a lecture hall with a PhD and a whiteboard and explain the rate of change. It's quite another for you to do it at a family barbecue or over a holiday dinner. I know that feeling. The pit in your stomach when someone you care about says, "It's all a hoax. It's just a natural cycle." Your instinct is to fight data with more data. Maybe you want to quote what I have talked about here, or shout about ice cores and parts per million. But here is a lesson I learned from my time as a TV meteorologist in South Texas, and later speaking at public aquariums on the Gulf Coast. You cannot fact-check someone out of a position they didn't fact-check themselves into. Most skepticism isn't about science, it's about the echo chamber we discussed earlier, the commentators and the silos. So how do you build the bridge I promised? Well, you can start with the yes and. When someone says that climate has changed before, don't argue. Say, "You're absolutely right. You clearly know your history." It can help lower the temperature of the room. Focus on the now. Transition from the distant past to the present. Use the stock portfolio or the bathtub analogy we just walked through. It's much easier for people to visualize doubling the red dye than it is to visualize atmospheric forcing. Make it local. In the American South, I don't talk about the Arctic. I talk about the weather and climate they have experienced in their lifetime. Ask them what they've noticed in their own backyard. Have the summers felt longer? Have weird storms become more frequent? This moves the conversation from a global political debate to a shared observation of the world outside the window. The goal isn't to win a debate. Believe me, most of the time you won't. I learned that lesson the hard way. Instead, the goal is to be a translator. When you stop being a lecturer and start being a neighbor who understands the weather, the conversation can change. As an educator, when I hear the hesitation in a student's voice, or neighbors, I've learned to recognize it isn't about a lack of intelligence. More often than not, it's a lack of connection. Again, we're micro-scale creatures trying to make sense of a macro-scale world, and when that connection breaks, we retreat into what's comfortable. Today I want to leave you with one thought. Science isn't something you believe in. We've fallen into a trap where we treat climate science like a matter of faith or political identity. We ask people, do you believe in science? But science doesn't ask for your belief. It asks for your curiosity. Think of science as a tool, a pair of glasses that allows us to see a world that is otherwise too big or too fast for our tiny brains to conceptualize. When we look through the lens of those ice cores or those tree rings, we aren't looking for a belief system. We're looking for a truth that is written into the very chemistry of our planet. In the classroom, I tell my students that the light bulb moment doesn't happen when they finally agree with me. I don't want them to blindly agree with me. I want them to question me. I want them to question themselves. I want them to seek out their own answers. But I want those answers to be based on data, not on hyperbole. My hope is they realize the atmosphere isn't an abstract political debate. It's the air they're breathing right now. It's that bubble we all live in. So this week, I challenge you. The next time you see a headline that makes you want to retreat into your silo, don't ask yourself if you believe it. Ask yourself, what is the data trying to tell you about the rate of change in your own backyard? Let's stop shouting across the gap and start using the tools that we have to see the world more clearly. Thank you for joining me for this first episode. I know that diving into the data can feel like trying to drink from a fire hose sometimes, but remember, the goal isn't to memorize everything. I tell my students that all the time. The goal is to understand the story the Earth is telling us. If you have a question about the climate you've been too afraid to ask, or if you have a differing opinion, I want to hear from you. I can use your viewpoints in future episodes. We don't build bridges by talking to ourselves. We build bridges by engaging with the people on the other side. I'm Dr. Mack. Whether I'm in the classroom, in front of a green screen, or right behind this microphone, I'm dedicated to finding the truth that gets lost along the way. This has been The Climate Translation. I'll see you next time.